Huh, do you feel that? A palpable sense of relief because we finished the mapping. We've mapped each and every one of our business objects here to its equivalent in the NIEM, and we built some new stuff when NIEM didn't have what this business object required. We've done all the mapping. Now we can move on through the rest of the steps of the message specification development process. Okay, so we're working our way around this diagram, aren't we? We did scenario planning, we analyzed requirements and had UML diagrams coming out of that, and we spent an awful lot of time working on a mapping spreadsheet. We did all that mapping of our business objects from the analyze requirements step to map all of those to NIEM, what they would be in NIEM. And our reward for that is that now we know what we need to actually make schemas and instance documents that reflect that. So let's get into that. And this is the build and validate step. So some things to talk about. We need to talk about conformance. We need to talk about subsets. And we'll have a demo. We're going to talk about extension schemas and exchange schemas and what they are, and then how these things all fit together. And that'll get us to where we start to know how to actually make the schemas. Now, in the end, building the schemas is building XML schemas, and you just work in an editor and you build the schemas. I'm not going to actually type up a bunch of schemas in front of you because nobody wants to watch that, but I'll give you tips and tricks on how to do that most effectively. Let's talk about conformance first. So NIEM conformance means following the rules in a couple of different specifications. One is called the naming and design rules, the NDR, and this has all the rules for how NIEM works. Every single rule for how it works. It all distills down to what I've been showing you in the training. You know, why do associations work this way? Well, the NDR says so, and it does it in excruciating detail. There's a second spec called the IEPD spec. So IPD, those are message specs. This is the spec that tells you how to put a message spec together. So it's the guideline for what a message spec needs to look like, what are the different artifacts, how do they work together, things like that. Let's take a look at them quickly just to see whether that's something you want to read or not. So let me pull up the message, or the NDR first. It didn't come up. Let me try it again. There we go. All right, so here is the link to the naming and design rules. Several versions of it. This page tells you about it and gives you links to the different versions. You can go and see the latest version, version 5.0. Typically, the NDR gets updated for major releases, so there'll be an NDR for version 6 as well, because these rules have to reflect the infrastructure changes we make to NIEM 6, so it needs to change in sync with it. So it's a long document. It's a long document. Here's the table of contents. There's introductions, document conventions, terminologies, conformance targets, how those work, the NIEM conceptual model, guiding principles, conformance to standards, modeling guidelines, strategies for a NIEM profile of XML schema. This is where we start getting into the actual rules. How do you define types? How do you define all sorts of things? How do you declare components? How do you group things together? It's a lot. It's a lot. And it's very, very long. Here, that's halfway and that's enough. Do you need to read this document? No, you don't need to read the document. Most of what you need to know, most of what these rules distill down to is what you've seen in training. And you can look at NIEM and use NIEM as an example, mimic what NIEM does, and that'll keep you in the rule space. You'll be following the rules because NIEM itself follows the rules. So you don't have to read the NDR. It's one of those specifications that's there. It's the rules, but hardly anybody actually reads through it to read those rules. I have to, part of my job, but you don't have to. So you don't really have to read that one. You really don't. The IEPD spec, on the other hand, is actually something you probably should read. The IEPD spec tells you what has to be in an IEPD or in a message spec. And it's a shorter document. I can just rip my way halfway down. It's not nearly as long. Has a lot of rules, but it's readable. It's not the worst thing in the world to read. And it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to read this. But again, you don't have to. You can go based off of the examples I'm showing you, things like that. But that one's not as onerous to read. And even though it's not as onerous, we're working to make it even less onerous. So we're working as we get to NIEM 6 to a new version of it that's going to be less of a specification and more of a guide. More of something that just helps you make IEPDs, helps you make message specs without getting bogged down in a lot of specification-y type of rules. So I said you don't have to read the NDR, but I also said the NDR is full of rules. So how do you make sure those rules are applied to your work? Well, you can do that because many of those NDR rules exist as schematron. They're assertions. They're assertions that XML looks a certain way. And there's a couple of ways you can check that. One way is using Contessa, which is an online tool. And we're going to look at Contessa in a little bit. And we're actually going to throw the sample IEPD documents against it to see how it works and see how it does reports. But you can also download that schematron directly if you're using Oxygen or if you're using XML Spy and you've obtained a plugin. I don't know if the plugin is free or not. I really have no idea because I don't use XML Spy. But they work directly in Oxygen. There'll be links to that as well. Again, it's not something that's interesting to demo. You basically have your file and you tell Oxygen to validate against the schematron and it'll tell you where mistakes are. That's good for while you're doing work. I like to do it that way while I'm working on a message spec as I go, but it doesn't give you a report. Contessa gives you a report. So Contessa is really the nicer way to apply these rules to your work to see if you're doing a good job. And we will see a demo of that. But in a nutshell, that's NIEM conformance. Follow the rules in the NDR, use something like Contessa or the schematron directly in a XML editor to check the rules that can be checked automatically. Not all the rules can be checked automatically, and we'll see the exact percentages soon. But a lot of the rules can be checked in an automated fashion. Next topic is subset schemas. So NIEM has 13,000 elements in it around that. You don't want them all. What you want is a mini version of NIEM. You want a mini version of NIEM that has just the stuff you want, plus anything you need to make the stuff you want work. So for example, if you grab crash, you want to also have crash type. And since crash type is derived from driving incident type, you want driving incident type. And since driving incident type is derived from incident type, you want incident type. And since incident type is derived from activity type, you want activity type. And since activity type is based on object type, you want object type as well. Well, the SSGT will do that for you. You just say, I want crash, and it'll give you all the stuff the crash depends on. So that'll help you do that. MEP Builder will also help with that as well. MEP Builder calls SSGT to do some of the heavy lifting, but it provides a different GUI in a different way and provides some ability to work on a mapping spreadsheet as you go. So demo time. Let's take a look at the SSGT and what it was really meant to do. What we've been doing so far with the SSGT is just using it as a search and discovery tool. And that's all we've been doing. Just been using it as search and discovery. This whole section off here to the left, we've just been ignoring. This is where your subset shows up as you carve NIEM down to what you want. So how do you do that? Well, let's start with crash because we're right here. So first, I'm going to show you the bad way to do it. Then I'm going to show you the right way to prevent the problems of the bad way. So first, let's say we search for crash. And I want to crash, so add a crash. And how do I know that? I've got a giant mapping spreadsheet I built that lists each and everything out of NIEM I want. So that's how I know what I want. I've got it all. That's why we do the mapping. The mapping spreadsheet ends up being a guide for making your subset. And some people do it in tandem. I've seen people who populate their mapping spreadsheet and build their subset at the same time. I don't like to do that. I like to do all the mapping and then go and do subsets once I know what I'm doing. Okay, so I added the crash. I know I'm going to need a crash driver. I added the crash driver. Cool. I know I need, not crash driver license, but I know I need, like there's a crash vehicle, right? I have to go to the next page, get my crash vehicle, and we'll add that. All right. And then I needed the crash, there was an injury, right? Crash person injury. Where was that? There it is, crash person injury, and I'll add that. And I feel like I'm doing a good job, right? I feel like I'm getting all the stuff I wanted. You see it all shows up in the left, and you'll see there are things that get added that I didn't specifically ask for. I didn't specifically ask for any of these types, but I needed them to make things work. If I ask for crash, I need crash type. And if I get crash type, I need driving incident type. And if I want driving incident type, I need incident type. And if I want incident type, I need activity type. So it shows it all. So is this right? Is this working fine for me? Alas, it is not. It looks like it is, and everything looks fine, But I do not have a crash person injury inside a crash driver, inside a crash vehicle, inside a crash. Don't have that. What I have are 4 separate objects: a crash driver, a crash person injury, and a crash vehicle, all sitting at the root level, 4 separate items. They're not nested inside of each other. It's just a flat list of 4 elements, because the SSGT doesn't know that you want them nested together. And if you just grab them from search as 4 separate things, it won't work. Things won't be nested correctly. So what do you need to do instead? Well, you need to add them kind of in context that you want them. So first, let's delete this. So a couple of things to note here. You can delete individual elements by clicking on the button next to them and hitting this icon with the check mark, which is the delete everything checked. So I click that, and everything went away that was related to crash. Crash went away and all the typing for it. If I want to delete everything though, this is the thing to check. The one without a checkbox. If I hover over it, I should get a remove all. If I click that, everything goes away. Now I want to warn you about that, because it's not immediately obvious. I love the SSGT and I use it extensively, but in my entire life of using computers, this is my least favorite UI element choice ever, because there really isn't anything about that graphic to me that says delete all my work with no recourse and warning. It's dangerous. It's a dangerous icon because it is not clear that it deletes everything, and there's no warning, and there's no way to recover your work. It's gone. So if you click this by mistake, if you think it's like a clear all checkboxes, it doesn't clear all checkboxes. It deletes everything. So you just need to be aware of that when you're using the SSGT. This is a dangerous button. I'm a trackpad user, and it's easy to mistakenly click on things with a trackpad. I will literally avoid it. I will not run my mouse over it because it's a dangerous button and you can lose all your work. So just do a quick screen refresh to clear the buttons out. So how should you add this stuff? Well, the way you should add it is the way is to add it in the search results by opening things and exploring them. So if I want to add crash, that's fine. Crash is a top level object. I don't have crash inside of anything other than the container I built for it. So I can add crash. But then I want to hit the plus box and I want to open it up. And the things inside crash, I want to add inside crash. So I'm going to open crash up, and here's where I want to add the crash vehicle. And I have choices too. I can do the cardinality right here as well. 1-to-1, I can do 1-to-1. And it added it. It scrolled up top of the screen, but it added it. Here's my crash vehicle. Here's my crash. One difference, the only difference you're going to see up here in the typing from the one before is now there's a little plus sign next to crash. And if I click on that, it opens up and says, oh, you didn't want just a crash vehicle on its own. You wanted a crash vehicle inside of crash type. Oh, now that you've told me that you wanted crash vehicle inside of crash, I have done it the way you wanted. So the SSGT, you got to tell the SSGT exactly how you want it. It's not going to guess for you, and it's not going to do that for you. It's not going to make assumptions. If you just click on crash vehicle in the search results, you just get crash vehicle. If you want crash vehicle inside of a crash, you need to add it inside a crash in the search results, or you can go to the crash page itself if you want. I never do. It's just easier. It's what I love about the SSGT. You can do all this stuff right from the search results. Then I've got the crash vehicle, and I would open that up. And inside there is the crash driver. And here's where I would add the crash driver. And then I would open up the crash driver. And inside here, I would add that role of person. And I would add the driver license. And then I would open these guys up. And the driver's license. We wanted the card identification, so we're going to add that. And that, we didn't go into card identification in detail, but it has an identification ID inside of it. The ID, again, is identifier. That's the string. So we're going to add that. And we're going to go down. Now we can close these because we've seen them. What else do we need to do? We need to open the role of person. Oh, actually we don't, because the role of person we're going to use as a reference. So we can deal with that later. And then we had, We had a bunch of stuff, but I'm not going to pull up. I'm not going to do every single thing. You don't want to sit and watch me click buttons forever. But here now things have changed significantly. We don't have a flat list of elements. You see all these plus signs over here for the types. So now we have a crash type that holds that crash vehicle, and a crash vehicle type that holds that crash driver, and a crash driver type that holds the role of person to point to the person playing the role of a crash driver, and the driver license. The driver's license type holds the license card identification. That's of identification type. That has the actual ID inside. Now we're getting what we want. We are getting the structure and how all these items fit together. And that's good. That's what we wanted. Oh, we also wanted crash date. Well, let's do crash date. Again, we have to know to show inheritance. Crash date doesn't exist as crash date. It exists as activity date in the context of a crash. So we need to add it that way. We need to do the show inheritance, and we need to open activity type here. And here is where we need to add the activity date. And we have to remember that activity date holds stuff. It's not the string itself. We have to go in there and go, oh, date representation, add that, and then we have to open that up and then add the actual date object there. And we keep building our subset over here. Now I'm not going to build the entire subset, but I do want to do one little thing. I want to go to person. And what's nice is you get visual feedback. The add buttons turn blue when you've added them. So you can see what you've added. You can see it over on the left. You know that now that you can open these plus boxes, and I always do. I open all the plus boxes to make sure I know everything is inside the things I intended them to be inside. Let's do one more thing. Let's go look at person. Again, we could, just from the search results, from right here, we can add person, but we could scroll down and find person name and add it here, but we wouldn't get it inside of a person. We'd just get person name hanging out on its own. Instead, we want to open up person. And inside of there, look at person name, which is going to be way down here. It's alphabetical, so it's just down. Add the person name, open that up, say we want the given name. Let's do cardinality on these just for fun. I've been lazy on the cardinality because it scrolls me to the top each time. Do the given name, the maiden name, we're going to leave 0 to unbounded. I mean, not maiden name, middle name, 0 to unbounded. So we're just going to add that. And then the surname down here, this one we would add 1 to 1 as well. And then we had to do birth date. So let's add birth date, but we need to open it up and get the date object. Oh, look at that. Date representation is already blue. And if I open that up, the date object is already blue. Why? Because we've already added them. We added them for crash date. When we added crash date, we got date type. So we already have date type, and we already have date type with a date representation inside of it, and we already have date already there to replace date representation. So it's already there. We don't have to add it a second time. NIEM is object-oriented in that way. Both of these things, both birth date and activity date representing the crash date, are both of date type. So we've got them. And again, we'll go over here and make sure we got all our stuff. We got a person with a birth date and name, and we got the name type with the different pieces as well. The one thing that's going to throw you a little bit when you look at this is, for example, person birth date here, it's got the date type, but the date type ends at date representation. There's no date representation type. It's an abstract. So the actual date object is down here, but isn't shown indented. It's not shown indented like it is in the search results. So you have to keep that in mind. Okay, so we've added a bunch of stuff. What next? What do we do now? Well, now we can go to generate documents. And generate documents will give us some things to do. We can save to a spreadsheet file, and this is a file that will look like the spreadsheet that the NIEM release provides. I don't know anybody who ever dumps their subsets to spreadsheets, but you could for documentation purposes. We can generate a want list. What is that? We saw that way early in the training where we talked about different artifacts, and I said, you don't know what this is, but you will later. Well, now it's later. So I need to get a new Finder window, and I need to go to Downloads. And here we've downloaded something called a want list. It gets nicely date stamped, although it does not use ISO format for the dates. I haven't convinced them to change that to ISO format. It should be. Everything should be ISO format dates. But it's an XML file. And when I load it up in my XML editor, let's close this, give us a little more room, close that. And we can close this too. Let's get as much screen as we can here for this. There we go. This is a want list. So what does a want list do? A want list lists all the things you wanted, everything you asked for, not the stuff you need to have because it's dependent on what you asked for, but all the stuff you asked for. It downloads it all for you. This is a way of saving your place. So you can come back, you can do work, download your want list, come back later, and import this want list back in to pick up where you left off. Because eventually the SSGT will time you out and your stuff will go away. It's like a couple of days, so don't worry about it. Don't worry like, go away from the computer for a minute, I better save my want list. But it will eventually time you out. So the want list is an XML file. Here are elements we asked for. We asked for a crash, we asked for a date, we asked for a person. These are all things we asked for on their own, including date, because date's a substitution group replacement there. So these all show up at this root level. And then we ask for crash driver type with a role of person inside and with a driver license inside. And we ask for crash type with the vehicle inside. And we ask for crash vehicle type with a driver inside. We ask for driver's license with the card identification inside. We asked for a couple of different kinds of dates. So we got we got activity date, and that was activity type. So we get activity type. Several things. We get activity type with the activity date inside of it. And the activity date then is what crash type is eventually based on. And so this gets inherited. Here's date type we asked for with the date representation inside. Same for an identification ID. Here's person name type with the given, the middle, and the surnames all inside of it. And then person type with the birth date and the name inside. Everything we asked for. Not everything that's going to be in our subset, but everything we asked for. So we can go back to the SSGT, and suppose I slipped and oh no, I deleted all my stuff. Well, that's okay, because I can go to options. There we go. I can go to options and I can upload the same want list here. It's the same page that you change versions on. One warning though, changing versions will delete your subset because the SSGT doesn't do migrations. So if you change the version, your subset's going to go away. So make sure you're on the right version. I can load a want list. Here's the one we just downloaded. Let's just load it back up. And now we are exactly where we left off with all the indenting we had when we left off, exactly the same spot. So that's one thing you can do, is save your place. But if you're done, well, you can generate other documents. You can generate the actual subset. So you have some choices. Do you want to include documentation tags? I generally just leave this yes, but if you have a really, really big subset, it can make validating faster if you don't have the documentation added to the schemas. You typically get a codeless spec that comes with. You can turn that off. I never do. And then you just generate to a subset. But when I go into it, and you'll probably just get a zip file on a different Mac, on my personal Mac, not my work Mac, it just downloads a zip file and I have to unzip it manually. Windows, you probably unzip it manually. Windows is great. One thing Windows has over Macs is you can look inside zip files in File Explorer. You can't do that on a Mac. You have to actually unzip it first before you can look in it. But here we are. This is our subset. It's a mini version of NIEM. Here's the want list. You get a copy of the want list when you do the subset. So if you're ready to do the subset, you don't have to generate the want list separately. It comes along for the ride. But then everything in this XSD directory, this looks just like the NIEM release pretty much, right? Let's open another window with that, because we downloaded that earlier. Here was the release we downloaded. Here's that XSD folder. Let's put one on each side. A good comparison to make. All right, so on the left is our subset, on the right is the full NIEM. So we've got the same folders, right? Pretty much the same folders. The only difference is we have more folders in the full release than we do in our subset. But we have adapter folder for adapters for external standards. Auxiliary, we're not using anything we didn't use CUI stuff, we didn't use statistics stuff. so we don't get that folder. We get the code table folder, we get the domains. We didn't, in my subset I just did, I didn't add any external stuff, so I didn't get the external folder. And utility is full of, that's where structures is saved and the app info schemas are actually saved and a few other things. If we open up codes, we gen C always, and I don't know why, it just comes along for the ride. But I don't have any code tables because I didn't use any NIEM code tables. I made my own code table, but I didn't use any NIEM code tables in the subset that I made. Now in our broader IEPD, I did use the SAMVA code table, and if I had included it in my subset that I just showed you, you'd see that, but you don't want to watch me click on boxes to get every single element. Domains. There's a bunch of domains in the full NIEM, but I only got JXDM. I only got JXDM because that's the only domain I took anything out of. I took JCrash out of there and the crash related stuff. So that's all I get. I just get that domain. And I get NIEM core, just like there is a NIEM core here. But there's some differences. Let's put them on top of each other like this so I get a little more room. How big is the full NIEM core? 707K. 707K. That's a lot. That's a lot of XML. The NIEM core for the subset up here, 11K. It's a lot smaller. We can look at it. Bring it up, and here's what it looks like. It's got local terminology, but then it's just the things we needed, and we didn't need a whole lot. We needed activity type, and activity date, and date type, and date representation. We needed identification stuff. We needed incident, because that's what driving incident is based on. And we needed activity type. Activity type was up at the top because that's what incident is based on. We needed person name stuff. We needed person stuff. We needed the stuff for the various name pieces. We needed text strings. We needed the actual activity date element, the date element, the date representation substitution group head, the identification ID of the person, and the role of person, and that's it. That's really all we needed out of NIEM core for the little one I did. Again, this is smaller than the full IEPD because I'm just grabbing what I did in the demo, but it's a small version of NIEM versus the full NIEM core, which can take longer to load. It's a much bigger file. Shouldn't take that long to load though. There we go. Oops. Text. Get that palette out of the way. There we go. So this is a lot longer. It's got a lot more stuff. If you notice, I'm sorry for I'm having trouble scrolling it exactly smoothly, but if you notice the scroll bar on the right is barely moving. And it's barely moving because there is a lot, this is NIEM core, there's a lot of stuff. I don't expect you to see any of this as it goes by. I just want you to get an idea. Yeah, this is NIEM core. This is the basic bedrock of NIEM. A lot of stuff in here. I don't want all this stuff. I just want the little bit. And that's what the SSGT is all about, is giving you that little bit. Now MEP Builder. MEP Builder is another tool out there that's just, it's in a 3-phase development process, and it's through phase 1. So let me see if MEP Builder is going. So this is MEP Builder. So this is a tool designed to help you create a message specification, help you build the different artifacts and put them all together. It's available on SourceForge. You can go and download it yourself and play with it. It runs on Docker. Docker is a means of running what are sort of virtual machines, but they're really mini virtual machines. They're not really virtual machines. But you install Docker, and then you basically create containers in Docker, and this is a trio of containers that work together to provide front-end and back-end functionality. It's a 1.2 meg download, or gig download. It's a pretty big download, so make sure you got the bandwidth for it and somewhere to save it. 1.2 gig isn't that big today, but still, it's not a tiny download. It's a reasonably hefty download. But when you go in and you do all the stuff and you get it running, and you pull it up in a browser, which I'm doing, running it locally, you get this page. This is your interface to MEP Builder. Now again, Map Builder is 1 year through a 3-year cycle, or a 3-year development phase. It finished phase 1, it's got phase 2 and 3 to go. That means it does some things, but it doesn't do all the things. So the idea is, you can get a tool that does some things now instead of waiting 3 years to get all the things. And I like that. It's good to have tools. Even if it's not fully done, it's good to have tools out there that do various things. So some of these things don't work. You can't download a full message spec yet. You can't copy one, to essentially clone it. There's also a functionality for it to act as a repository, but that's not implemented yet either, just so you know what those things are. You can delete them, and you can view ones that you've already made. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a new one. We're going to play around and create a new one. So you hit Create New MEP, New MEP, give it a name, and we're just going to call it Training Test. Give it a release number. This is a NIEM release. We're going to use 5.0. It doesn't support 5.1 yet. I'm sure it will soon. And give it whatever revision number you want. And you give it a status like alpha or beta. Give it a point of contact. We'll just say me. We'll give it an email address. Yeah, we'll go ahead and type my email. Well, we're not going to type my whole email address in. You don't want to watch me type. Now at this point, you can either hit save and get right into it, or you can hit save and close. I occasionally have caching issues on my Mac using Map Builder. I'm pretty sure it's Mac specific. So I like to do save and close. That makes sure it got saved and takes me back to the list of all the ones that we've done so far. And I may occasionally also need to refresh. So let's go ahead and do the refresh. And there it shows up. Again, this is not a Map Builder issue. This is just caching in Safari on my Mac. So don't worry about it. But if it doesn't show up, then you hit refresh. So here's Training Test, the one we just made. Again, it's only in phase 1, so some things are just kind of hard-coded. It's going to say justice for the domain. It's going to say JSON for the format. Those are just hard-coded in there because that isn't supported yet, so don't let that throw you. We want to go and play with it. We hit the view folder, and that brings us into the actual IEPD. At this point, we can show more metadata, so we can give it a description, and we can do an organization name, for me, GTRI, and organization type. I'm just going to leave that blank for now, but you can fill in additional metadata there. And then you get the different steps in the life cycle. You've got scenario planning, where you can upload whatever kind of document you need. Whatever it is you need, you can just go ahead and upload that. So I could say upload, and I could go browse, and I could go find a document. I could go find a diagram. I could go find really any kind of document I want, and it would get uploaded here. I'm not going to do it because a lot of actually dealing with that stuff is phase 2 and phase 3 stuff. So there's not much to show you other than uploading a document, but you upload documents here. The second step is analyzing requirements, and this is where we can start getting into things like a mapping template. So I mentioned way at the beginning when we were talking about the beginning of mapping that there is a NIEM mapping template, and that Map Builder uses that as an input format. So you don't have to enter your data online. You can do it in the template. So you can download the template here, and it'll just download it. I've downloaded it and then pre-filled it with a few things. So let's go over to Excel. So here it is. Actually, I haven't preloaded. You're going to watch me preload it with a few things. So we're just going to do person, a little bit of person. So we got person, and we got person type. Now this is the UML side, so this could be whatever I wanted to call it. Person name, and I'll just call it name type. You do have to fill in these two columns though. And let's do person last name. And whatever last name type is. So we got those 3 there. But you also have to do the second tab. There's the type tab. And here you have to say what the types are. Just in your own words, we're going to map all these to NIEM in Map Builder, but you need to have some types here because this is where you say what things go into what things. So it's similar to the SSGT. I remember just a little bit ago we did the SSGT and we had flat elements if we did it wrong, but if we did it right, we got structured elements. Same thing here, you need to tell Map Builder how you want the structure to go. So we're going to need a type for person type, and these are just the same types. But this is basically off the prior tab, person name type, and then that last name type. So I've got the types, got the property stuff. Though I know those are pretty small, let's make them a little bigger so you can see. So there's all the person name stuff. Here's the type stuff over here. So we're going to save that. And then we're going to go back to Map Builder and we're going to upload a document and browse to it. Go into Downloads. And then we have to pick what type it is, what type of artifact it is. In this case, we're doing a mapping spreadsheet, and we're going to upload it. And it says uploaded successfully. So now if we want to actually map it, use it for mapping, we have to import it as a mapping spreadsheet, because who knows, it could have been in any number of, you can have multiple mapping spreadsheets. It could be a spreadsheet that represents something else. So you hit the import mapping spreadsheet, click on the button, the drop down, and pick the one that we just uploaded. And we say load. And there the stuff shows up. Now this is here, we're just viewing it. We're not actually doing anything with it. This is just analyzing requirements and reviewing it. Now we can move on to the Map and Model button. And the Map and Model button will show us the same information. Here's the person name, the person last name, and it has the different tabs. It has the tab for the types, and here are the 3 types. The other tabs are still here, okay? And they're maintained in Map Builder. Map Builder doesn't do anything with them though, and that's important to know, because if you're submitting content to NIEM, you're going to use this type has property to say what goes into what. But if you're using Map Builder, you do it here in the type tab, and we're going to see an example of that here. So let's just go and map these things. So here's person. If I want to map that, I click on the map button, and it pre-fills it in with the name I put. And I search SSGT, and it'll take a sec because it's got to make some calls to SSGT. But it's actually asking SSGT to do this search and come back with results. And the results will be in the same order that they are when you do it actually in the SSGT. And this is the same list you would get in the SSGT. So it's like, here it is. Here's person. I want person. And it has confirmed, do you want to do that? Yes, yes I do. And now what it's done, if I scroll over to the side, is it's pre-filled in all this stuff. So this is great. It puts the prefix, puts the property name there, puts the type, puts the definition. That's great. It's a lot of grunt work you don't have to do. It's an element, it's not abstract, fills all that stuff in. So that's great. It's a really nice chunk of functionality. Let's do person name. So hit map and search SSGT for it. And again, it's making a call out to the SSGT. Because I left the space in, it didn't show up first. We know that it'll show up first if it exactly matches. Here's person name. Click on the button, just scroll down a little, want to map that. We get the same thing over here, get the stuff pre-filled in, great. Person last name. Just going to leave it person last name, search the SSGT. And it comes up with surname as one of the choices because, hey, that's in the last is in the definition, so that shows up. Click on the little radio button, say, yep, that's the one I want. So now we've mapped the elements. But the problem here is, it's not a problem, it's the same thing we had in the SSGT. When we just went and grabbed, we just grabbed crash and crash vehicle and crash driver, right now it's just 3 elements, just 3 flat elements, the elements we need, but they're not nested inside of each other. That's what the type tab is for. Oh, one thing I didn't mention up here, these are filters, which is really handy. You can filter what you see by just typing things in here. That's what those are for. So now we're going to go for type, and now we need to map the types. So person and last name we really don't have to map because nothing's going to go inside of there. That's just a string, and we will get the base types for these. We will get person type just because we grab person, but we're not going to get person name inside a person type. That's what we need to do here on the type tab. So we say map, we fix our typing, or fix our mistyping here. I'll just do it 1 so it shows up first as one word. And then what you'll get back from the SSGT is, there we go. It can take a little while to come back. It's making multiple calls to the SSGT, so you just need to be a little patient. Each one of these names can be open now. If I want to see what's inside here, what things of this type contain, I can open it and see that. You see where we're going with this. But it does mean that each entry in these search results is a separate call to the SSGT. Just as it sometimes takes the SSGT a little bit to actually give you the information because it's throwing so much information around. Same thing here, it's the same amount of information and it just takes a little while. But here's person type, and if I open it, it automatically gets selected with the radio button, which is halfway down, and there's a lot of person stuff. So there's the button there, and here is where I would go and say, I want the person name inside person type, and set the cardinality however I want, and then map it. And then what I get in Map Builder is, here's that type, and then here is the thing I wanted inside that type. And I have to do the same thing for person name type. Now, unfortunately, I believe there's a bug, and it's a known bug, that is right now keeping this from being something I can open up. But I want to show it anyway, just in case. So here's person name type that matched. I can map it, but I can't open it up. And it's a known bug. It's on the list to be fixed, so the next version will have this fixed, but I could map it. If I decide to map more than one thing to a type, it will just list them all here in this column. It'll just say person name, comma, person birth date. Let's do that really quick. I should have done that while we were in there, just so you can see that it really does it. And again, it hasn't failed. It just takes it a bit to come up. And again, that's just a lot of SSGT calls. I can add person birth date as well. And I'll confirm that mapping, yes. And now when I go look at person, and now we'll see they're both there. They're both listed there. And any other ones you add will be listed there. So here's where you do that structure. This is how we know. This is the same as the little plus box on the typing in the SSGT. This is how we know that indeed we have a person name, a person type with these things inside of it. So it's a different paradigm on how to do it, and it's really interesting. And I just love being able to search and have things get pre-filled. So that's some really good functionality there. Now at this point then, you can go to the build and validate step, and you can say generate a subset schema. So you generate a subset schema, successfully completed, cool. So then we just download it. And now that'll be in our download folder. And here's our download folder, and here it is. But there's everything in it. Again, here's the want list that represents the stuff we wanted. Just take a quick look at it if we want, instead of loading it in editor. And then here are the mini versions of NIEM. And we didn't take anything from the domain in this little demo. We just did person name stuff, but that's all here in NIEM Core. If we pull up this NIEM Core, it's going to be real small because we just asked for a few things. So we go to our download folder, and then this is a subset. And this is just like if we had done it with the SSGT. We got a mini version of NIEM Core. We have our want list that represents what we asked for. We can take a quick look at that. We don't have to actually open it up in an editor, but we can see we have the person and the person name and the person surname, the things we asked for. Again, just a mini tiny version for a mini tiny demo. Now the rest of the stuff in here is coming in the next phases. So right now you can open this tree and you can see the various things that got added. You can see that here's that mini NIEM Core that got added. Here is the template that we uploaded, the actual mapping spreadsheet we uploaded. You can't do much with this right now. That's coming for phase 2 and phase 3. So eventually you'll be able to do the assemble and document. Right now it doesn't do it, but again, that's upcoming function for it, where it'll be able to then assemble the different things you've put up there, take that subset, take that want list, take diagrams and other documents you've uploaded, and wrap it all together in an IPD, in a message spec, and let you download it. And then eventually be able to publish that to repositories. Now we haven't talked about repositories. We're in a state of flux on repositories. We'll get to that, but that's part of the plan as well. But that's a quick overview of Map Builder and how you can use Map Builder to generate subsets, but to also do searching in the SSGT, basically basic lookup stuff to look up elements, look up their types, and look up the definitions for them and have them pre-added into the mapping spreadsheet. The only other part I didn't show you is you can also export the tabs individually. So if I want this property tab, I can download it as comma separated or as PDF, either way, and I can do that with the type tab as well. and download them both to have them. It doesn't really round trip. Once you're in Map Builder right now, you kind of stay in Map Builder, but again, more functionality to come. So really cool tool with a lot of potential. So let's get back to our notes. All right, so now we've learned about subset schemas. We know there are many versions of NIEM that just have what we want to get our job done, to get our exchange defined. There's a couple other schemas. One is extension schema. So we've talked about extension schemas a bit now because that's where we put our new stuff. This is where we create new elements for our exchange. They go in the extension schema. It's got its own namespace, its own schema file, it's its own file. It's got its own prefix as well. Typically we use ext. When I do extension schemas, I emulate how NIEM does it, to the point where I will copy and paste things out of NIEM and change the names to suit my purposes. If I want to make a type, I will copy an existing one out of NIEM and just change the values to have what I want. There's another method to that, and we're going to see it in a little bit, but that's just typically how I do it. I just copy and paste and then delete the stuff I don't want and add in the stuff I do. Utilize augmentations to add new stuff to existing NIEM objects. So we did that with the email address, and we did that with the person defenestration indicator, where instead of making specializations of things in NIEM, we took existing NIEMs, utilized the augmentation point, the pre-existing hook, and hung our new stuff on that. Concrete extension is an alternative, but remember, if you change something deep in a hierarchy by making a special version, everything that holds it has to be redefined too to hold the special versions. You can have multiple extension schemas. You may want to organize your extensions in multiple schemas. You may have multiple different exchanges that all share a common extension schema, but then each exchange has its own separate extension schema for things that are specific just to it. And then some folks put code tables in a separate extension schema. I do this typically too. You've got an extension schema with new objects, a second extension schema with code definitions. The reason for that is that code table definitions can get long. I mean, we looked at code tables, right? Each code has a whole chunk of XML. So if you've got a code table with 1,000 codes, which is not that unusual, that's a big chunk of schema, a big chunk of XML right in the middle of all your other schema. You don't need to know all the codes when you're looking at your extension schema. So it's handy to put it in a separate schema. Then there is the exchange schema. The exchange schema is optional. This used to be required, but people just stopped wanting to use it. I like it. The idea with an exchange schema is it's an additional schema that goes with the extension schema. Inside the exchange schema, all you do is define the root element and the definition of the type for the root element. Now, a lot of people lump that all together in the extension schema, and that's just fine. It is perfectly fine to do that if that's what you like to do. Some people don't. Some people put it all in it, put those two in an exchange schema, and I'm one of those people. The reason I like to do that is because it isolates the root element and the root element's definition into a different schema, and just makes it really easy to eyeball. Let me take an example look at that. Let's go at our IEPD. So here's the IEPD when it's all done and when you do everything. And if you go through the mapping spreadsheet and you go and you check every one of those things in the SSGT, and you get your subset and you add some documentation and you're all done and you do your extensions, here's the extension schema. Here is my exchange schema, which I just name after the IEPD. But let's open them up and take a look. So here's the extension schema, and here's all the new stuff. Here's our license augmentation we made, and here's the hook we're going to hang it on. Here's the type for it here, and then we added contact information to it. Here's the defenestration indicator. Here's the hook we're going to put that on. Here's the privacy metadata. Here's the privacy code table we made. It's just a little code table, so we didn't put it in a separate schema. Up at the top, here are all the namespaces we're using. Cool, we got all those things in there too. So this is the extension schema. And then I like to have a separate exchange schema. And here's all that's in the exchange schema. Here's the root element crash driver info. Here's the type for it. And all it does is batch together these 6 things. And what I like about having this separate schema is, number one, I immediately know that this is the root element of everything, crash driver info. Because it's the only element in this schema. it's the root element. If it's in the extension schema, maybe I put a comment to say, hey, this is going to be the root element. Because these things, when you do NIEM, everything's at a root level. Everything is globally defined. That's for reuse. That's so I can take anything out of NIEM and use it, literally anything out of NIEM. But the downside to that is, well, this is all just any one of these elements could be the root element. Here it's very clear. What I also like is that just looking at this one schema gives you a good idea what the exchange is about. You don't know the details, but you get the general idea that you got a person in a crash, a charge, an association between the person and the charge, and you got some metadata. That tells you a lot about it. It tells you a lot about the exchange without going into any of the details at all. So I think it's very handy, but it's totally optional. You can just put it all in the extension schema if you want. Now these things all have those imports. They all have their namespaces and they import in the different schemas, and it ends up forming a web like this. Your crash driver, that's the exchange schema at the top, and it pulls in the extension because it's using extensions of some of the stuff in extension, and it pulls in justice because it's using that crash object, and it pulls in NIEM core because it's using person, and it pulls in structures because it's making an empty container that's going to hold stuff, and that's in structures. It doesn't pull in that NIEM-XS because it's not in and of itself using any simple data types, so it doesn't need that. Extension, however, pulls in a bunch of stuff. Pulls in NIEM core, pulls in geospatial to get that external standard, pulls in justice because it's using other crash stuff. So it pulls in a bunch of stuff, and it is, we do like person defenestration indicator. Well, that's Boolean, so it has to bring in NIEM-XS as well. So it pulls in a bunch of things. Justice pulls in that AMVA code table for the severity code. The geospatial, NIEM core next pulls in simple data types and pulls in structures. The geospatial wrapper there, that pulls in the GML, the actual external standard, and GML pulls in something called Xlinks. What does Xlinks do? I have no idea because I'm a NIEM expert, not a GML expert. But the bottom line is that everything eventually gets pulled in. These schemas don't all reference each other, but eventually they all get pulled in. And so when you try to validate a document against the crash driver schema, the validator will follow all those imports and pull in all of those, are they 10 different schemas. They will all get pulled in, and the validator will understand, will learn and read, learn, and understand the rules in all 10 of these schemas to form the vast set of rules for what the instance document looks like, and then that's what the instance document gets validated against. So that's how the schemas all fit together. So a little help with doing these schemas. Number one, use a good validating XML editor. And you might have to pay. You might find free ones, but generally you got to pay for this. XML Spy is typically used by Windows users. Most Windows users, not all, but most use XML Spy. XML Spy will run you a few $100s if your employer doesn't already have a license to it. For people not on Windows, Oxygen is the usual alternative. I use Oxygen. Oxygen's cross-platform, works on Windows, works on Macs, works on Linux, very cross-platform, costs a few $100s, similar to XML Spy. It is not a cheaper alternative to XML Spy, but it's a cross-platform alternative to XML Spy. When you make your schemas, you have to declare a conformance target. So what does that look like? Let's take a quick look. So let's go back to our XML. And up here, we have an attribute called conformance targets. And this is a reference to, this is a URI, it's a reference to what are you conforming against? And there's just one answer. That is the answer. That is the answer. We decided to try to get fancy a while ago with conformance targets, with the idea that you could write your own conformance targets, your own set of rules you're going to conform to, and then here you would point this attribute to your own rules. And really, nobody really did that. The string here that's highlighted, that is the string, the name for I'm following the rules in the NDR that apply to extensions. There are rules in the NDR that apply only to NIEM itself, but I am following the rules that apply to extensions, which is most, but not all of the rules. And this is the one answer for your conformance target. You just need to have this in your extension schema and in your exchange schema, because exchange schemas are just a special extension schema. That's it. You just put this in. You just do. That's the answer. But it needs to be there because this tells us that you're saying this is conformant to the NDR, to the extension schema part of the NDR, to the parts of the NDR that apply to extensions. You need to have it in there. But all you do is you copy and paste this. That's all you do. Make sure you declare and import all the schemas you're using. So let's go look at that extension schema really quick. Here's our extension schema. We need to make sure we're declaring them all. So we declare ourselves, which matches our target namespace, but we're declaring that we're going to use justice. We're going to use J, and there's J's name. We're going to use NIEM core, and there's its name. We're using that geo wrapper, there's its nickname. GML, there's its nickname, and so on. And then down here, we have to import them all. Got to make sure we have import statements for them all so that a validator can look and find out what the rules are. A validator isn't going to know what the rules are for things marked with a J : unless it can follow that nickname to the full name for justice and then follow that full name of justice to find the location of the schema that has the rules for justice. So that's what that's for. There's a small weird warning here about watching out for schemas incorporated only via substitution groups. It's a very esoteric problem, but when it happens, it'll drive you nuts. So I just want to let you know that it's out there. Suppose I'm doing some stuff, I got some stuff in NIEM core, and I've got a substitution group head in NIEM core, and it's going to get substituted by one thing out of human services. And that's the only thing out of human services I'm using. The only thing I'm using out of human services is that one thing. So here's what will happen then, is I will generate my subset, but NIEM core won't have, NIEM core won't import human services. It won't know about it because human services, that substitution group member in human services points to NIEM core, not the other way around. So that element in human services knows that it's going to substitute for that head in NIEM core, but NIEM core doesn't know that. And so you can end up in situations where that human services guy doesn't get imported in. You forget to import it in because it doesn't actually show up in NIEM core. There isn't the actual reference going that direction. The reference for substitution groups goes from members to heads. And so the lesson here is if you find out your stuff doesn't validate and your validator, your XML editor says, I just can't find this file, make sure you're explicitly incorporating that somewhere. You would need to import that human services domain, and your extension schema might not do it because it's not being used directly in your extension schema, but NIEM core isn't going to do it because it's also not being used directly in NIEM core. It's esoteric, but I have wasted hours on this, so I wanted to warn you about that. Just remember, if you run into that kind of a problem, just think about this and go, am I importing everything I really need to import? Along with the schemas come sample instances, and they are required. You're required to have a sample instance that validates against your schemas. There's a number of reasons for doing that. Number one is it makes sure that your stuff works, right? You want to make sure that your instance document looks the way you think it's going to look and that it works against your schemas. Validating against your schemas ensures your intent. The things you thought the schemas were going to do, they're actually doing. So it's really important. It's also really good because sample instances act as a guide for people who are implementing as to what you really wanted, because schemas can provide more leeway than you really want, and so they're just really important. Most XML editors can create them from schemas. So you can take your schemas, you can point your XML editor at them and say, make me some instance documents, and it'll do it. You're going to need to tweak them. They never work out correctly. They never ever work out totally correctly because they don't know what you're going to do as referencing, what you're going to do as inclusion. They just don't know, but they'll get you part of the way there. JSON instances, that's a manual process. We don't support JSON schema yet. By the end of the year, we should, but right now you just got to do your JSON manually. There's nothing to really validate it against. It's just not as nice. And there are other tools out there as well. So let's do some tricks and tips that will help you do your stuff. Well, first let's look at an instance document. That'd be a good thing to look at. So here's our crash driver IEPD again. And we looked at the crash driver exchange schema and we looked at the extension schema. And if we open these things up, we can see here's our mini version of NIEM. Here's the justice domain that we wanted. Here's the external standard stuff that we would have asked for. Now again, I didn't show you going through and adding all these because honestly it just would have been tedious to watch me go and add every single element, but I did do that. I added every single element out of the mapping spreadsheet to generate my own subset, mini version. Codes is going to have the AMVA code. There's that AMVA code we wanted for the severity code. So there's our mini version in NIEM. We've got just a JSON version that we just generated for fun. So there's a JSON version there as well. And here's our sample in an IEPD sample folder. So this is the instance document that validates against it. So this is what it looks like. And this follows exactly that structure in our text document that we've been using. Now, I have ulterior motives with that text document. That text document, I have a little tool in my text editor that can take that indented text and turn it into an instance document. So I got a little tool in my back pocket that helps me with that. I think it's valuable just for understanding, but it also saves me some grunt work. Am I going to show you that tool? No, it's not interesting to watch. Am I going to give you access to that tool? Well, honestly not. It runs in BBEdit on Mac OS. So unless you're using BBEdit to do your XML on a Macintosh, which probably very few of you are, it isn't going to help you. But I've got my own little stuff to help make these sample instances. So there's lots of ways to do it. If you want, this is all just text to deal with. So here's our instance document. Here's that person object. It's got an ID. It's got the birth date. It's got the date. It's got the name. Here's all the name pieces. Here's Peter's name pieces. We've got the crash object. Here's the activity date in the context of a crash. That means it's a crash date. And then it holds a date inside of it. There's our crash vehicle with the driver. The driver's a role, so there's a role of person. That reference points up to the top to where Peter is. We've got the driver's license with the card identification and the ID inside of that, the string. We've got our license augmentation bag that holds our contact information and our email. And then we have the crash person here, who's part of the crash. They've got an injury. They've got a role as well. That also points to Peter. But suppose we could have additional people in here that were injured as part of the crash. It's mostly about Peter, but we could set it up to have other people. We could have it set up to have multiple crash person objects, perfectly fine. Here's the injury. Here's the description text and the severity code we got for that. Here's our person defenestration indicator we created. And then here's the location of the crash. And here it is in external standard format using GML. Or if we want to stick with NIEM, here's NIEM with the 2D, with the degrees and the minutes and the seconds if you wanted more precision. Or you could just do decimal values in the degree. It could be 51 dot blah, 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 blah. Whatever works for you. Down near the bottom, we keep going. We got our person charge association. Got a person linked to Peter. We got a charge that's linked to the charge object right below. Here's our charge object. It's got the description text. It's got the felony indicator. And then we've got our metadata. So here's that justice metadata block with the criminal information indicator. And then the one we made a privacy metadata. We added a privacy code. This one was PII. Added another metadata with a code of medical. They both could have been in one metadata block. The only reason I did two was so that I could come up here and say, look, this crash person injury, there's metadata that applies to it, and it is these two metadata blocks down at the bottom. And so everything's linked together. One thing you'll notice at the very bottom of the screen is a green box that says validation successful. What my validator has done, it has looked up here where I said, hey, validate this against this schema. That's what I'm telling you. I'm telling you to validate it against this schema. And so it went and it did that. And it read that schema, which pulled in the extension schema, which pulled in NIEM core and justice and all that stuff from the diagram, pulled it all in, figured out all the rules, and then tested this document against those rules and said, yes, it worked. Congratulations. If I screw something up, it's going to tell me. Even something as simple as, remember I said these code tables, it checks these. So if I change this to 8, which isn't one of the codes, I get a description at the bottom. Value 8 is not valid with respect to the enumerations, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 9. It has to be one of those values. It has to be one of those 6 values. It'll tell me that. If I put it back to 3, the red squiggle goes away and it says validation successful again. And that is true of any mistake I make in here. Anything I make that no longer fits how the schemas say it needs to look will give me an error. If I misspell something, if I say person name X, it's going to get mad. It's going to say, there is no person named X. What are you doing? Don't do that. It'll take care of that. If I've got the organization wrong, it'll take care of that. It'll tell me about that. It'll tell me everything that I have done wrong by checking it against all those rules. So it's really, really handy and important to have. So that's why you want to use a good editor. A good editor will check all that stuff for you. So tips and tricks for doing that. Well, one is Oxygen snippets. If you're using Oxygen, Christina at GTRI has made snippets, and snippets are essentially templates. They're templates that let you quickly create different NIEM things. Now, my personal way to make a new object that's structured like a NIEM object is to copy and paste a NIEM object. Her way is actually a little quicker. There's a website about it, talks all about it, says how to install them, gives you a list of what they all are. I've already pre-installed them because I think they're really cool, but they're all listed here and they'll be in the resources as well. And the way it works is this. I go to my editor, make a new file. I'm going to make an XML schema file. Now again, this only works in Oxygen. I don't know if XML Spy has any sort of templating behavior or not, but this works in Oxygen. This is an Oxygen only type of tool. So Oxygen will let me start a schema, give me a skeleton. And if I want to make anything NIEM in here, I type NIEM, has to be lowercase, and I hold Control and space. So just do a Control space. And it will search the templates it has for templates that start with NIEM. And Christina has made all these templates for different NIEM things, all sorts of them. So if I need to make, if I'm making a code table and I need to make an enumeration, click on that. Here's a simple code table for making enumerations. It's all set up. It's a data type for ... So I'd fill that in with, whatever I want to. And here's code number 1, A, and I give it a value, I don't know, A, I guess. Here's another value, B, and give it a value, B. And there I go. And if I need more enumerations, I just copy and paste from there. But it does a lot of that grunt work for you and make sure you're in the right format. Just do NIEM, Control space, and if I need to do just an element, normal NIEM element, NIEM ELT, it'll tell you about it over here, tell you a little about it. If I select it, I get my little template for it. And I can put a name in, I can put whatever the type is here, like NIEM core type, some NIEM core type. There, I can put my documentation in, I'm good to go. I want to make complex types, I can do that as well. All of these things are in here. Basically, every NIEM structure there is in here. They're all in here, and you can just go in here to make them. It's really nice. It's a really cool way to quickly do NIEM work. I still copy and paste because I'm just so used to that, but it's a really nice tool for that. Oops. Go back to our notes. Second tool is the Schematron. You can use the Schematron to check your work as you go. Works in Oxygen. Works in XML Spy with a plugin. I do not know whether that plugin is free. I'm not going to show you the Schematron because it's really boring to watch. But if you want to delve into validating against Schematron locally in your XML editor, there's a whole page about it. It tells you which files to download, where to get them, what to do to actually kick the process off. It doesn't give you a report. It gives you a red squiggle and an error. A red squiggle and error. It looks like this. You get red squiggles and you get errors. It's still handy. It's not a report in quite the way that Contessa does. And again, we're going to show Contessa still. You've got Map Builder. So we already watched Map Builder. Here's the link to Map Builder. We've got Tom's BBEdit instance generation scripts, which we just said, it's probably too esoteric. If, however, you do use BBEdit on a Mac, hit me up and I will share. And you have to have Perl installed because I wrote these, like 20 years ago. So yeah, it's a really esoteric, narrowly focused user group there. But if you happen to be on a Mac and you use BBEdit for your XML work and you're willing to install Perl, I've got Perl scripts that run in BBEdit that will convert indented text to XML. And then finally, there's the mapping spreadsheet linter, which is a tool of mine. So we're going to do a quick demo of the linter before we move on to the next topic. So what linter is, well, linter is an experiment. The idea is, what if I had a good mapping spreadsheet that did what I wanted it to do? If I did a good job on the mapping spreadsheet, could I do more stuff with it? Could I do more interesting stuff with it? And the answer turned out to be yeah, you can. And that became the linter. So here's how the linter works. You go to the main linter page, and again, linter is under development. Linter is like alpha, maybe beta. So it's pretty rough and ready. But here is linter, and the way linter works is the main page tells you what all the columns mean in the mapping spreadsheet. And this is the same mapping spreadsheet that I use. So I mean, this is also documentation to my mapping spreadsheet. But there's a template to download. Download the template. It's a tab delimited file. I like tab delimited because it's easy to parse. But it's tab delimited, which means I have to actually right click and say save this, or it'll just show it. It'll just show it in the browser. Now MapBuilder uses actual Excel files as an input, so it's a little smarter. Linter is not quite as smart there. It needs tab separated. Tab separated is supported by both Excel and Numbers. Numbers is a spreadsheet program that comes with Macs. It's not as powerful as Excel. It's nowhere near as powerful as Excel, but I find it aesthetically pleasing for simple database stuff. So I like that. And this will look, this will look very familiar to you. This is the crash driver IEPD spreadsheet, right? It's got all those property names we mapped to. And it's got some of the stuff on the left. It doesn't have all the stuff on the left, but it's got some of the UML stuff. It doesn't have the types filled in. Has the base types filled in for when when I'm making something new. Has the type filled in when I'm making something new. It does have all the contained in and subgroup heads filled. This is why I do these two columns, solely to use this tool. You don't want to use this tool? You don't have to do these two columns. It's got a category, which I've left blank, doesn't really get used. The same thing with definitions, cardinality, sample data, comments, and the exchange path is all empty as well. There's just not a lot to it. It's kind of halfway done. It's got the basics. It's got the minimum done, but that's the idea. The idea is do the minimum. Why would I want to put the type for birth date here when I can look that up? Why do I want to put the type for person name here when I can just have something look it up? You'll notice here, that's an error. That's misspelled. How do you catch stuff like that? Well, let me show you. So let's go back to the linter, and we're just going to import that template. You know, and it's kind of halfway done. It's not done particularly well, but it's got the basics. It's got the minimum. It's the minimum viable mapping spreadsheet. So we're going to go ahead and choose that. We're going to say start mapping it, and we're going to get this essentially report. This is the same mapping spreadsheet, but now the linter has done some work with it. And what the linter has done is everything here that says it's from NIEM, the linter has gone and checked that it really is from NIEM. So you get a red X here. This is a mistake. This is not a NIEM element. I couldn't find this. I asked a database for it. There's a database behind it. I asked for stuff about the NIEM core data element, and there wasn't one, so I flagged that as an error. Over in the property column, it does some auto-filling of stuff. It's like, hey, I know there's a NIEM person. I know what that type is. So I'm going to fill it in for you. That's what the green box means. It means I auto-filled something in for you. Now, if you don't like that, you can revert it back to nothing. So you can always revert things here. You don't do any editing in the tool, but you can revert things that you didn't like what it did. So it does all the auto-filling it can figure out. It does all of that. And most of it can. Here's some more errors. This element is the base type column right here. So these are red because there was no base type added. No base type for privacy metadata type, and no base type listed for privacy code type. These are new things we're making. There's no type. Also, note that it made a guess on these. It just said, oh, you're making a new thing called privacy metadata. You didn't give it a type. You probably want to call it privacy metadata type. Oh, you didn't give privacy code a type. You probably want to call that privacy code type. You don't like that? That's okay. You can just revert it. Perfectly fine. Then when we come over more, we get to definitions. Pre-fills and definitions, so that's always nice too. If you see the blue I for info, that means the definition is too long to fit in a drop-down comfortably, so you can just hover over it and you will get the longer definition. And again, if you don't like these, you can just get rid of them. It will make up definitions for new stuff, but it'll just be a definition for the new element. It adds in cardinality. It will pick up cardinality from the UML side, but if it doesn't see any, it'll just do a one-to-one. And then finally, it does the message paths for you based on the contained in and the substitution group head columns. So that's why I maintain those columns. It's easier to maintain those columns than it is to maintain these paths. So it did all the paths for us, and they're all exactly the same as in the mapping spreadsheet. To be honest, I used this to make that mapping spreadsheet. I did not do all those paths by hand. I did those paths with a tool because it's not fun to do. So these are all the same paths. Again, you don't like one, you can just revert it to blank. So that's pretty cool, but I had some errors. What do I do about that? Well, I go back to my spreadsheet and I fix the errors. So I make this date. Cool, that's good. And I go down, and the other things I didn't like was I didn't have types for these, I didn't have base types. So let's be good. Let's go ahead and we'll do some types. So we'll make this type, and then this one is privacy code type. And then let's copy this, pop it over here. I try to minimize how much you have to watch me do things like this, but this is code simple type. And then this is structures metadata type, which I'm going to let this fill part of it in and then just fix it up. All right, so cool. Let's save that. But we're not going to save it. We're going to export it to tab separated. And Excel can do tab separated as well. It's not quite as easy because Excel, you have to do some options to do it. This is just one of the ones that's already here on a Mac. This Numbers does tab separated easier, but you can do it on Excel too. So now, unfortunately, because this is beta, I have to go back to this page to re-upload a new thing. So let's just refresh to make sure. Now we're going to know this is the one we just updated. Now we're going to do the mapping again. And now things are a little bit better. Here now date is fine. It pre-filled in the date here. Now it's not going to be mad about these things here. There's also a yellow box for warnings, which we're not going to see because I could have saved this as tab. I could have downloaded back down and then changed that. That's one of the options, which I really should have shown you. You can make those changes and accept all its suggestions and just download the new mapping spreadsheet. I didn't do that because I was going to re-upload it anyway, but I can just right here download the mapping spreadsheet, and we will get a new version of that. And we could have modified that, but I knew it was going to fix up everything for me anyway once I got to it, so I didn't do that. Whoop. Come on. There we go. And so here it was with all the stuff changed. So here everything's filled in. The exchange paths are over here. They're all filled in. All the definition stuff, all pre-filled in. So it did all that grunt work for me. I mean, I know you're not reading individual guys here, but it did all the grunt work for me. So that was really cool. The other thing you can do is once you've fixed up your errors, or even if you haven't, but once you've fixed up your errors, you can say, give me a schema package instead. Instead of getting the spreadsheet, you'll get a whole schema package. And it's not perfect, okay? It's just, it's a good start though. And we haven't talked about all these artifacts yet. We're going to. For right now though, I just want to show you, you don't actually get a subset. It can't generate a subset, but you do get a want list. And this is a valid want list. And if you put this into the SSGT, you will get the same want list as if you had done it by hand. So it does do the want list. And it takes a shot at extension and exchange schemas. It gives it its best shot. So, and it's going to have errors because it's not perfect, but it gives you a basic extension schema with the stuff you asked for. You know, I wanted license augmentation. That was something new. Here's the type I wanted. Here's the substitution group it goes inside of. I wanted a code. So, yep, I wanted a code table here. It's actually going to make a fake little code table for me with one code. So then I can just pre-fill that, and it puts a little skeleton, gives me a comment that you need to add more of these, does the code type for that based on the simple type. So it does a lot of the grunt work. It also does a stab at the exchange schema. So here's our exchange schema. Here's our crash driver info type, crash driver info type, and same things, the same 6 things. So it does a pretty good job. It isn't perfect, doesn't work right, you got validation errors, but it gets you part of the way there. It does some of that grunt work for you. The rest of the stuff in here is documentation. So we're going to revisit this, and we're going to revisit the sample IEPD as we talk a little more about documentation, which is our very next topic.